Serafina Voss was not the kind of woman who made decisions out of fear. She made them out of clarity. On the morning of her 18th birthday, she sat at a small wooden desk in her room at the edge of the Ashenvale Pax territory and wrote the most important letter of her life. Her handwriting was neat and deliberate. Her sentences were short and honest. When she finished, she folded the paper twice, walked through the long marble corridor of the Alpha King's estate, and slid the letter quietly beneath his chamber door. Then she walked back to her room, packed a single bag, and did not sleep. The letter was a rejection. Not of love. She was too young and too practical to call what she felt love. It was a rejection of a bond, a mate bond, the kind that the wolf world considered sacred, unbreakable, and more important than any personal choice a person could make. She had felt it the first time she stood in the same room as King Kaelan Draveth, a pull so deep it felt like gravity. But gravity, she had decided, was not a reason to stop walking. She wrote to him simply. She told him she felt the bond. She told him she was choosing not to accept it. She told him she was not running from him out of fear, but walking toward herself out of purpose. She wished him well. She meant it. Inside his chamber, King Kaelan Draveth read the letter once. He was 24 years old. He had been Alpha King for 2 years, following his father's early death. He was respected by every pack leader in the 5 territories. He was obeyed without question. He had never, not once in his life, been told no by anyone who was not immediately corrected. He read the letter a second time. Then he stood, crossed the room to the fireplace, and dropped the letter into the flames. He watched it curl and blacken and disappear. He turned around, called his beta in, and began discussing border patrol schedules as though nothing had happened. He never spoke her name. Not once, not to anyone. He told himself, over many years, and in many quiet moments, that this meant he had moved on. He was wrong. Serafina crossed the eastern border of Ashenvale before sunrise and did not look back. She had no great plan. She had a small amount of money, a bag of practical things, and the kind of confidence that comes not from certainty about the future, but from being completely certain about oneself. She knew who she was. She knew what she wanted. She was going to become it. She traveled east for several weeks, taking work where she could find it, learning the roads and the people and the politics of the territories she passed through. Eventually, she reached the coast. And beyond the coast, reached by a long ferry crossing of cold gray water, were the Valdoran Isles. Valdoran was different from anywhere she had ever been. It was not an Alpha Kingdom. It had no single ruler who had inherited power through blood or strength. It was governed by a council of elected members, and at the head of that council sat a man called King Aldrich, a title that was largely ceremonial, but which carried enormous respect because Aldrich had spent 40 years earning it. He was old, sharp, and completely uninterested in politics as a game. He was interested in it as a responsibility. Serafina found work as a junior assistant in the council offices, filing documents and making tea and listening to everything. She was quiet but never invisible. She asked good questions and gave better answers. Within a year, she was drafting correspondence. Within 3 years, she was sitting in on negotiations between trade partners who had been arguing for a decade and leaving those meetings with signed agreements. Aldrich noticed. He always noticed. He gave her more responsibility. She handled it without drama. He gave her harder problems. She solved them without shortcuts. One evening, when she was 22, he called her into his private office and told her, plainly, that she was the most capable person on his council. He told her he was getting old. He told her he had been watching her for 4 years and had made a decision. She listened carefully. He said he wanted to name her his chosen successor. Serafina was quiet for a moment. Then she asked him what the process looked like, what the council would require, and what timeline he had in mind. Aldrich laughed for a long time. He said that was exactly the kind of answer he expected, and exactly the reason he trusted her. 2 years later, Aldrich passed away peacefully in his sleep. The council met and voted. The result was unanimous. Serafina Voss, 25 years old, was crowned Queen of Valdoran. Back in Ashenvale, Kaelan Draveth ruled well and lived poorly. His pack was prosperous. His borders were secure. His decisions were respected. By every visible measure, he was a successful king, but his beta, a quiet and observant man named Doran, had known Kalen since childhood, and Doran could see what no official report would ever record. Kalen did not sleep well. He had not laughed, genuinely laughed, in years. He had taken no Luna, and when the topic arose, as it always did among advisors concerned about succession, he would close the conversation with a look that ended all further discussion. He worked constantly. He trained harder than any of his warriors. He was, Doran privately believed, a man running from something he had decided to pretend did not exist. Doran never said this out loud. He valued his position. Then the crisis came. A long-running territorial dispute between two of the 5 Alpha Kingdoms had escalated past the point of negotiation between the parties themselves. Pacts were moving, lines were being threatened, trade was being disrupted across the region, and the disruption had reached even Valdoran's shipping routes, which meant Valdoran could no longer remain diplomatically neutral. Every major power was called to the table. The summit would be held at Greyvale Castle, which sat on a strip of land technically belonging to no one. Neutral ground. 5 Alpha Kings and the Valdoran delegation, all in the same building for 4 days. Kalen arrived first. He always arrived first. He stood at the head of the main conference table, reviewing the territorial maps that had been spread out before him, when the doors at the far end of the hall opened. His wolf went still before he had even looked up. That ancient, deep part of him that did not reason or argue or make logical decisions simply stopped. Like an animal lifting its head at a sound it has waited a very long time to hear. He looked up. Serafina walked into the room. She was wearing a crown, not a large ceremonial one made for portraits. A working crown, silver set with white ocean stones, unmistakably Valdoran in design. She wore deep blue robes and moved through the room at a calm, measured pace, speaking quietly to one of her advisors without looking around nervously or making any effort to be noticed. 2 senior council members walked behind her. She looked as though she had been walking into rooms like this her entire life. She reached her seat at the far end of the table and pulled out her chair and sat down. Then, as she arranged her documents, she looked up, and her eyes found him directly, as though she had known exactly where he was standing the entire time. She nodded. A single, composed acknowledgement, the nod of one head of state to another. Kalen realized he had not moved since the doors opened. He looked back down at the maps. Around him, conversations had resumed. Advisors were exchanging documents. Someone asked him a question. He answered it. He was very glad his face was trained, after many years of practice, to reveal nothing. The first session lasted 3 hours. It went the way these things always go, carefully, with everyone saying a great deal, while agreeing to very little. Serafina spoke twice. Both times, her points were so clear and well constructed that the room paused, genuinely considered them, and then moved on in the direction she had indicated, without quite admitting that was what they were doing. Kalen heard every word. When the session ended, he spoke to Doran briefly, then crossed the hall and requested a private word with the Valdoran Queen. Serafina agreed with the same polite composure she had shown all afternoon. They were led to a smaller room off the corridor. The door was closed. They were alone for the first time in 7 years. She did not look nervous. She did not look particularly anything, except present. She was simply there, looking at him, waiting. He had planned what to say. He had been organizing words in his head since the moment she walked in. All of it left him. He told her he had burned the letter. She said she had assumed he would. He asked her why she had sent it then. She told him what she had written, that she would not allow the circumstance of a bond to decide who she became before she had the chance to find out. She asked him one question in return. She asked if he would have let her become herself, a full person, a separate person, if she had stayed. The room was very quiet. Kalen said nothing. The silence was the most honest answer he had given anyone in years. Serafina nodded slowly, as though a question she had long since answered for herself had now been confirmed. She was not unkind about it. She was not angry. She was simply accurate. She told him she did not hold it against him. She said the man he had been at 24 was the product of everything he had been taught, and she did not think people should be permanently defined by the people they were, before they had reasons to change. She picked up her documents from the table where she had set them. She said she looked forward to a productive summit. The next 2 days were careful and difficult in ways that had nothing to do with territorial maps. The mate bond, which Serafina had spent 7 years building her life around the edges of, did not become quieter in close proximity. It became louder. She recognized it clearly, the way you recognize a song you learned as a child. It is familiar even when you have not heard it in a very long time. She acknowledged it privately and continued working. Kaelin was less composed about it, though no one except Doran could tell. A complication arrived in the form of King Morek, of the Caldrath pack, who was positioned near Valdoran's shipping lanes, and therefore had genuine political reasons to speak with Serafina frequently. He also found her impressive, and he was not subtle about it. He was pleasant and capable, and had no history with her, which made him, from a purely practical standpoint, very uncomplicated. Kaelin watched these conversations with an expression that Doran described to himself privately as a man trying very hard to appear uninterested in something that was taking all of his attention. On the third night, Serafina returned to her chambers after a late working dinner to find an envelope on the floor just inside her door. She stood in the doorway for a moment. She did not need to see the seal to know who had sent it. She set down her things, sat in the chair by the window, and opened it. It was not a declaration. It was not a request. It was a letter, the handwriting slightly uneven, as though the hand that wrote it had started and stopped several times. It was from Kaelin Dravith, and it said, in plain and careful language, that he had spent several years understanding something he wished he had understood earlier. He wrote that he had burned her letter because the idea of being rejected had been something he did not know how to hold. He wrote that he had later understood it was not truly rejection that had frightened him. It was the fact that she had been right, and he had known she was right, and that knowing was uncomfortable in a way that burning paper could not fix. He wrote that he had watched her today in that room, and the day before, and he was not writing to her because of the bond. He was writing because she was one of the most impressive people he had ever encountered, and he was sorry it had taken him this long to say so, without the weight of 7 years of silence making it complicated. He did not ask her to accept the bond. He did not ask her for anything. He ended the letter by saying only that he was glad she had become exactly who she had intended to become. He said it was very clear that she had. Serafina read the letter twice. She set it on the table beside her. She looked out at the sea for a long time. She was not sentimental by nature, but she was honest. And she was honest with herself now, honest about what she felt, and honest about the fact that feeling something was not the same as being required to act on it immediately. She went to sleep. On the final morning, the summit produced its resolution. It was Serafina who found the path through, a proposal that gave each party a meaningful concession, while requiring each to release one unreasonable claim. It was the kind of solution that seems obvious after someone says it, and impossible before. The room accepted it, and the agreement was signed before noon. As the delegations began to prepare for departure, Kaelin crossed the main hall. He did not take her aside. He walked toward her in the open, in front of advisors and kings and members of every delegation, and stopped a respectful distance away. He said he was grateful for what she had done at the table that morning. He said he believed she already knew that. Then he said there was something else he wanted to ask, and he asked it simply. He said he would like to write to her. Not about politics, though he expected politics would come up. He said he would like to simply correspond, at whatever pace she chose, about whatever she was willing to share. He said he was not asking her for anything beyond that, not a decision, not a resolution, not anything she had not already freely offered. He said she could say no. He said he would understand it more this time than he had before. The hall was not silent, but it might as well have been. Serafina looked at him. Around her wrist was a thin white scar from a border crisis 3 years ago that she had managed alone. On her head was the crown she had earned from a people who had chosen her freely. In her chest was something old and warm and patient, something she had never stopped being aware of. She said, one letter at a time. Not a surrender, not a beginning with conditions attached. A door, opened at her own pace, by her own hand. Kaelin nodded, just once. That evening, Serafina stood at the window of her chamber and watched the ships in the Valdoran harbor below, the lights moving slowly across the dark water. Her crown was on the table behind her. She was simply a woman, in a quiet room, deciding what she wanted. In Ashenvale, Kalen sat at his desk. He picked up a pen. He thought for a long time. Then he began to write. Neither of them knew exactly where it would lead. But for the first time, they were both walking in the same direction. Not because a bond had pulled them there, but because they had each, in their own time and their own way, chosen to go. And a choice like that, freely made, is the only kind that lasts.